Guys, I'm going to take you on a little journey about certain things happening to me in my life growing up when I was younger, some hardships, why they contributed to my crippling insecurity, lack of confidence, and some anxiety, and how I overcame those by incorporating my shadow. So I'm going to take you back to a young boy, an 8-year-old boy. We just moved house. We just moved to a different community, a different neighborhood. And up to this point, I'd never ever had any trouble with my peers. I was never bullied or anything. I was a very popular kid. I moved to this new neighborhood and I meet all the new kids and I start playing football with them on the first night and everything seems great. Everything's going well. They seem to like me. I get on with everyone. That's great. A couple of days later, I go to meet up with them again. And for some reason, they decide that they're going to capture me. They're going to throw me in some bushes and start throwing sticks and stones and shit at me and beating me. I'm not exactly sure why. I have some theories. I won't go into them. But this continued and progressively got worse over the coming 3 years, I would say. 3 to 4 years. And I'm not just talking bullied like just beaten up. They beat me and they beat me bad, but they also humiliated me. They did things to me that are absolutely humiliating. I won't go into it, but it was some of the worst bullying, group bullying that a young child could go through. And at the same time, a year into this, my parents get divorced. Okay, and obviously when you're a kid, you see things from a very narcissistic viewpoint and you believe that everything that happens to you in a negative light is your fault. So for me, the bullying was my fault. My parents' divorce was my fault. So my dad moves out. And my dad, and he was a good dad, but he had a very, very nasty temper on him. He would get very aggressive with you. He never laid hands on us, never hit us, but shouting, and he would get scary. And he would also get in fights. So many times we were out in public and he didn't like something someone did or said or whatever. And it would result in a huge argument, and a few times it went into fisticuffs and he got into a fight. Actually, one time he got into a huge fight in a cinema in the middle of a Harry Potter movie. So kids and families everywhere, it was the whole palaver. So that was also awful. Throw on top of the fact that these neighborhoods, I was living in, this neighborhood I was living in, it was a town called Dunstable, which is right next to Luton. And Luton and Dunstable, and both were a shithole, right? Both were very, very rough neighborhoods. And then when I got a little bit older, I moved to North London in Tottenham. I moved there when I was 16 to move in with my dad as I was playing tennis full time. And North London, Tottenham, maybe the most dangerous place in the whole of England. Probably, certainly in London, very, very rough neighborhood. So when you add in all these things together, I ended up growing up and telling myself a narrative that aggression is bad. Aggression is bad. That's what I would tell myself. These guys that were bullying me, that was bad. My dad losing his temper and getting into fights, that's bad. This rough neighborhood, oh, that's bad. These guys are dangerous. So what did I do to combat that? You've got two options, especially if you live in a rough neighborhood. You've got two options. You can try and make yourself as tough as possible, or you could try to become as invisible as possible. When you add up all those things that happened in my life, and at certain times they happened, and multiple things happening at the same time, I ended up taking the latter choice. Try to make myself invisible, try to make myself as unthreatening as possible. And that meant telling myself any type of aggression or assertiveness was bad. Keep quiet, don't get into arguments, don't get into fights. That's fine as a kid. Don't get into trouble. I actually had despite these things happening to me, I actually had a very happy childhood. I was a happy kid. I was never depressed or down or anything, but I repressed things, but that came to light when I was older. But I had a happy childhood. I was a happy kid. And I'm a happy guy. But as you grow up as a man, going into manhood, it it became apparent that this notion of aggression is bad was hindering me in a big way. I got to the point where I was very insecure, especially insecure around other dominant men, especially if I see some dominant man, especially if they're in groups. This is probably where the trauma is involved. I would see these sort of tough guys, or alpha guys, if you want to say that. I hate those terms, alpha, beta, etc. But your alpha types, your loud, cocky, confident guys, they would really intimidate me. I became insecure, and soon it became hard to look people in the eye when I was talking to them and so on. And fast forward to my young 20s, and I started listening to Jordan Peterson, like so many of us do in the self-improvement sphere, in the manosphere. And he started talking about shadow work, and it resonated with me so much because I realized there and then I hadn't incorporated my shadow at all. I'd been told that aggression was bad. I told myself aggression was bad. Remember as well, I was raised for most of my life by my mother and in a femme-centric society in the West, in England and so on. And so you're told, along with the narrative I was telling myself, aggression's bad. It's not good. I realized that had to change. I realized I had to incorporate my shadow. I realized I had to embrace some level of aggression. I had to tap into that inner beast that every man has, that I had dampened down because of my life experiences and the narrative I told myself. So you have to understand, if you're one of those people like myself who didn't integrate their shadow going into adulthood, you find yourself at the whim of other people's beliefs and ideas and society's ideas for you. So basically, you don't really have a mind of your own. You don't have a sense of self. You're just sort of part of the group, part of the wider tribe that is society or whatever, and the trends of the time. And I found myself having this spiritual awakening around 25 years of age and realizing that, oh, wait a minute, I don't have a sense of self. I'm not my own person. I'm not an individual here. My thoughts are very rarely my own. I have to do something about that. And then that led me down to this path of getting into shadow work and understanding it, and understanding that was a very necessary thing to do if I want to consider myself an individual, a free thinker. And one way I really noticed that I hadn't integrated my shadow when I understood this is that I found myself to be quite a resentful person towards other people in how they treated me. And that's what happens with people who are weak in that regard, right? That's how they act. They get bossed around, and they're scared to say no and scared to stand up for themselves, so they get told what to do all the time. They become very resentful to these people, and eventually they start imagining these scenarios where really bad things happen to these people, and then they imagine themselves doing those bad things, and that was me. It's almost like that movie, right? Horrible Bosses. That whole movie is based around these asshole bosses, but these employees, they're too scared to stand up to their bosses and say no, and they're getting pushed around all the time, so they just meet up their friends and they bitch and they moan about their bosses until eventually they agree that they're going to kill their bosses. That's basically it, right? That's the bunch of dudes who hadn't integrated their shadow enough. They weren't strong enough in that regard. So if that resonates with you, if you realize you do that as well, then you probably need some shadow work. So how do you go about it? How do you incorporate your shadow? Well, here's the thing, is there is no blueprint on how to do it. It's not a sort of general approach people can take. It's very individualistic. And so I can't tell you how you should do it. All I can tell you is what I did, some of the steps I made. And maybe they help you, maybe they won't. Maybe they sound ridiculous to you, I don't know. But the first thing I started to do was get into debates online. It was a stepping stone for me, right? Being online is a little bit easier to debate people, especially when you're someone like me. like I told you, the worst thing for me to have done was step outside of the ideas of society, say anything controversial. I wanted to always keep the peace, so I started doing that, started saying controversial things. I always agreed with what I was saying through my research and studies, but they were against mainstream thought a lot of the time. Very anti-feminist stuff, anti-obesity. Eventually I started getting more and more, shocking in some of the things I would say. I'm definitely looking for a response. I found some entertainment on it, but I found like it was ridiculous, really, what I was doing. So I started moving into, face-to-face debates, debating people, talking about it, disagreeing with them, step by step, until I became very comfortable doing that. Other things I would do is I would go out of my way. I would purposely set times where I'd be quite rude. I tried to be quite rude. Again, this was very awkward for me. I was always told and taught and told myself to be very polite and well-mannered at all times, be nice at all times. So being a little bit of an asshole and being rude, started with little things like not saying please and thank you, and eventually I pushed it towards actually just being outright rude at times. I wouldn't be too much. I wouldn't want to escalate a situation that would get nasty, but it was definitely awkward enough. And another part I studied and read a lot on assertiveness training, how to be assertive. So that's a step, because you realize you can't just be an asshole. That's not the thing to do. It's actually, assertiveness training is, making sure you set your boundaries and what you want without being an asshole. So I would probably recommend doing that first. Doing that in general, not just I wouldn't really recommend being the asshole thing, but that's what I did. And I did find benefits out of that. And then the last thing I've done, and I've been doing this recently, is learning to fight, picking a martial art and learn to fight. And obviously the benefits of that are aggression. You're bringing out your aggression. You're learning to fight somebody else. I've been doing boxing now, not for too long. I'm not at a super high level, but I am starting to see myself improve. I'm getting into a bit of sparring now. So you let out the aggression and you understand, when you learn to fight, confidence goes up as a man massively. Knowing you can handle yourself in a fight. Now for me, throughout my history, the stories I've told you here, the trauma, etc., a lot of the insecurities that I faced and the problems that I created in my mind were because of the physical aspect, the physical violence that was bestowed upon me by other children and so on, and the things I saw. So I was scared to fight. I never put myself in a fight. I never got in a fight in my life, ever. I avoided violence. I used to tell myself, I'm a lover, not a fighter. When really I was just a pussy. I was just scared. And so now, knowing and developing the skills, understanding I can handle myself in a fight, and I'm not fully there yet, right? I've only been boxing for about 4 or 5 months, but it is improving and my confidence is growing, and I can only imagine when I'm fully competent in those areas how confident I'm going to feel. And every man should learn how to fight. I'm going to raise my sons to learn how to fight and defend themselves. I have no doubt, if I knew back then and I was raised as a child how to fight in something, in boxing or jiu-jitsu or something, that bullying wouldn't have gone on for very long. Of course, it's a very masculine thing to do, and that's what it's about. Integrating the shadow, you become a man who is capable of danger, of aggression, but you have it under control. A lot of people that you find that start fights and go around and get into fights regularly, these are people that don't know how to fight. So they're insecure. They're always trying to see what they can do. They test themselves. People that know how to fight, martial artists, are some of the most peaceful, nicest people you'll ever meet. Because they've got nothing to prove. They know what they're capable of. You have it under control. Whenever it's necessary, if it becomes necessary, you can use it. You're fully confident in your skills. So they're the things I did. They've helped massively. I've still got some way to go. I'm not perfect. This is, maybe it will be a lifelong thing for me. I don't know. I'm not fully there yet, but 1000% better than what I was. much more confident as a man, much more comfortable with conflict, verbal or whatever it will be, and being assertive. I have no problem saying no, setting my boundaries. My life has improved so much because of it. So if you're one of those people that need to incorporate their shadow, do it. Get started, guys. There's no time like the present. It's never too late. Because this process started to improve for me straight away. I started to notice it within weeks. I've been doing this for a few years now, and the progress is on a constant upward spiral. It's always going up. I'm always getting more confident. So give it a shot. I hope this video helps. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know your experience with this stuff, if you've been through it, if you're practicing it. And check in as well. Let me know how it's going. All right, hope this helps, and join me for the next video.